In 1545, a king closed his eyes forever. He was only 30 years old. Inside the palace, a rumor began to spread. His own mother did this to him. If France had Catherine de Medici, Korea had a woman just as feared. She would not let go of the throne, not even when her own son sat on it. There are records of a grown king being struck by his own mother. They say she destroyed a stepson to crown her own child, and then turned that same child into her puppet. Was it fact, or was it conspiracy? Today, we open the door to one of Korea's most feared queens. In 1515, the king's second wife died just 6 days after giving birth to his first son. The infant boy would one day become king. The following year, a new queen entered the palace. She was only 17. History would come to know her as Queen Munjeong. At first, she raised the young prince as if he were her own. But in 1534, everything changed. Queen Munjeong finally gave birth to a son of her own. The problem was simple. The throne already had an heir. From that moment, the palace split into two camps. One loyal to the crown prince, one loyal to the queen's new son. A silent war began behind the palace walls. In 1544, the old king died, and the crown prince finally took the throne. He is remembered today as King Munjeong. But almost immediately after his coronation, his health began to collapse. According to legend, Queen Munjeong once called the new king to her chambers and offered him rice cakes with her own hands. For years, she had shown him nothing but coldness. This was the first kindness he had ever received from her. Munjeong was known for his deep devotion to his stepmother. He accepted the gift without suspicion. Soon after, he was struck by violent stomach pain. 8 months into his reign, King Munjeong was dead. He was only 30. The official court records tell a different story, that his devotion and grief simply wore his body down. But historians still ask the same question. Why did a healthy young king collapse at exactly that moment? Coincidence or calculation? When Munjeong died, the throne passed exactly where it was always going to go, to Queen Munjeong's son. The new king, remembered as Munjeong, was only 12 years old, far too young to rule, so his mother ruled in his place. But this was no ordinary regency. She empowered her own brother and used him to hunt down every noble family loyal to the dead king. Framed as treason, the Purge began. Some were executed, some were exiled, some simply vanished from power overnight. In a single bloody sweep, half the royal court disappeared, and Queen Munjeong became the most powerful woman in the history of the Korean royal court. By tradition, a regency was only temporary. Once the young king came of age, power was supposed to return to him. In 1553, King Munjeong turned 19, and Queen Munjeong formally announced she was stepping back. But it was a title only. Real power stayed exactly where it had always been. in her hands and in the hands of her brother. The king sat on the throne, but he was not the one who ruled. Her brother, Yoon Won-hyung, rose to become the most powerful man in Korea. At his side was his mistress, a woman named Jung Nanjung. Rumors claimed she poisoned his legal wife to take her place, and eventually she did. Bribery became routine across the entire kingdom. Local officials paid to keep their positions. Distant relatives sent expensive gifts just to stay in the queen's favor. The corruption grew so normalized that people in the palace quietly kept a price list for bribes. Even her servants exploited her name, seizing property from ordinary citizens in broad daylight. And at the root of it all stood one woman, Queen Munjeong herself. With her power secured, she pushed her personal beliefs onto the entire kingdom. She kept a Buddhist monk close to her and tried to revive a religion the kingdom's ruling class had spent generations trying to erase. Her officials protested, but no one could stop her. Court records describe how, whenever things did not go her way, she would scold and shout at her own grown son as if he were a child. Some accounts even claim she struck him. The king of Korea had become nothing more than his mother's shadow. Yet there was one thing even Queen Munjeong could not control: where she would be buried. While she was still alive, she had already planned her own afterlife. She wanted to rest beside her late husband forever. In 1562, she had his tomb moved to a site near her own stronghold. But no location sat too low in the land. Every rainy season, floodwater rose right up to the tomb itself. In the end, the burial she had planned for herself never happened. The woman who once held all of Korea in her hands was laid to rest completely alone. In 1565, Queen Munjeong died. Almost immediately, her favorite monk was executed in exile. The religious reforms she had spent decades building collapsed within months. Her brother's power crumbled soon after. His mistress took her own life. It was as if her entire world had only ever been held together by one person. Her son ordered a funeral fit for the greatest of kings. But the official records describe a very different scene in the streets. Ordinary people, hearing of her death, are said to have shouted curses instead of grief. For a woman who had ruled an entire kingdom in blood, very few tears were shed. History has seen women like her before. In 16th century France, Catherine de Medici ruled through her sons the exact same way. 3 of her boys sat on the French throne, one after another, while she held the real power behind them. Catherine, too, was blamed for a massacre that wiped out her political enemies overnight. Just like Queen Munjeong, she was never officially crowned as a ruler, and yet no one doubted who truly controlled the throne. 2 queens, 2 kingdoms, separated by an entire world, and yet strangely the same story. So, who was Queen Munjeong really? Some call her a woman who did whatever it took to protect her son in a court built to destroy the weak. Others call her a ruler who poisoned the king, crushed her enemies, and turned an entire kingdom into her own personal instrument. Was she the queen who protected her bloodline? Or was she the woman history still cannot forgive? The answer, like so much of her story, remains buried in history.